I'm ready. Well, today is April 5th, 2003. It's been many years since Galambos first announced that he was intending to write the book of his theories. That was in 1971, March 14th, at the 10th anniversary alumni meeting for the founding of the Free Enterprise Institute. I was honored to speak at that meeting. Howard, I believe you were there. Julie, you were there. Mr. Moore was here. Anybody else there? No. The rest of you are newcomers. Some of you in this room are maybe just only one couple, I suppose, now, because there are some other people here that never heard the theory. But Dr. Orr and his wife, Mary, are in the back row, sitting next to my wife here. I highly respect them, and so I invited them to come to share in this historic event. Historic because for the first time in the history of the world, we have the offering of a true, universal education in human reality. That's never before been offered. The old demand for an education has always been met by a defective supply of irrational, unintegrated, and mostly wrong so-called education. Galambos defined education as the successful transmission of absolutely right conclusions and how those conclusions were derived to those who not only understand them, but apply them to the real world. And the real world is the world which is derived from absolute rightness, which is taught in his theories. Just as a little refresher for all of you, absolute rightness means the simultaneous application of truth, defined as that which is observationally corroborable, and validity, defined as that which satisfies the rules of logic, and morality, which is an absolutely new and revolutionary concept based upon the sanctity of property, which itself is a discovery of absolutely revolutionary, new import, and which means non-coercive behavior. Now, most people will hear that, and they'll intellectually digest it, and they'll say, yeah, everybody knows that. Everybody knows it's true. You know, the truth is acceptable, validity is acceptable, and morality, everybody knows you have to be moral. But they don't realize that those three parameters, those three criteria of absolute rightness completely refute and repudiate the entire world you live in. And I mean everything. How people interact, the ways of civilization, the ways of doing business, the ways of getting married, raising children, in short, everything. Everything. Education is an ancient demand that now can be met. What I'm going to show you now is something that is very small in my hands. And yet I say to you at this historic meeting that what I hold in my hands is the single largest, most significant achievement in the history of the human species. It's electronically captured here. What is more, the ideology, the psychology, the science, the philosophy, the semantics, the simplicity, etc., that's contained in this is truly what Galambos called it. Sic Itur Ad Astra, which translated from the Latin into English means, this is the way to the stars. All human experiences, all human experiences in endeavoring to create a societal structure that will be able to obviate or circumvent the inevitable decline and fall of nations has failed. It has failed because it did not have the criterion of absolute rightness that I just mentioned, which is in this course. Now, it's also in hard copy, as they say these days. That is to say, it is finally in book form. Book form. Tangible. Before your very eyes. And this is it, right here. The roadmap to the natural public, Galambos called it. This is probably the single most significant event that has ever happened in the history of the world outside of Galambos' own achievements along the way. For now, the terminal crisis of man, which is that we have the technology to wipe ourselves out as a species, but we lack the technology to prevent that from happening, has now got a solution. We do have the philosophy, the principles, the semantics, the criterion of absolute rightness, the method and the principles and technology to prevent that imminent tragedy from happening. So there it is. Today, I proclaim to be the official date for the publication of Sic Itur Ad Astra. The book is now published. Galambos long ago said in 1971 that after 6,000 years of recorded history, man's inertia of mysticism had been overcome singularly by himself. And he likened it to the allegory, or had an allegory of a rocket. And he said, we now have liftoff. To get liftoff, you have to have an awful lot of propulsion. And that propulsion has to overcome the enormous weight and the pull of gravity that holds that rocket to the earth. But if you have enough thrust and enough propulsion, and you keep it firing, then ultimately the rocket will overcome its inertia and its weight, and it will lift off the earth. He said he had overcome the titanic weight of 6,000 years of religious and political mysticism. And he did it all alone. It's hard to believe, as you think about this, that one single man could have lived in our own generation who was of such enormous stature that he compares be the first time in human history that the fundamental universal nature of all volitional beings, including human beings, has been identified. There have been approximations to this in the past, such as the biblical one, that all men are born with original sin. And boy, does that seem to be almost true completely. But there are exceptions, and that's not good enough to formulate a postulate. All right. Let me tell you something. This that I hold in my hand is known. Hello, Victoria. Nice to have you here. Now I can proceed. I've been waiting for Victoria to arrive. This is one, by the way, Victoria is one of the most loyal, dedicated, no, I'm not handing this to you, students of Galambos that I've known on the opposite side of the gender fence. I look upon her as an ideological daughter. She's loyal to me. She was loyal to Galambos. She has a good heart. She's brave. And I respect her enormously. That's why I've been stalling around until she arrived. Now I can go. I can go. I can talk to you now. I'd like to share with you what happened Since, let's see, what have I got here? I've got to switch glasses. Like General Washington, you know, at the Newburgh Address. You all know about that? Who does not know about the Newburgh Address? Please raise your hands if you don't know. All right, well, after the War for Independence, just as a side note here, Washington realized that his generals were disgruntled. They hadn't been paid. They'd gone through enormous privations. Their men were mutinous. And so they had said to George Washington, we're going to go out and create our own damn states. We have the military power to pull it off, and we're going our own way, like the generals did for Bolivar in South America, which produced nothing but banana republics, and it's never had any culture since. We had the same tragedy brewing in America, and Washington came along and he gave a speech to his generals, and it's called the Newburgh Address. You should read this. It's touching, and it shows you how great our founders were. And Washington was giving this talk, and he was telling them, no, you should not do this. This will result in tariff restrictions. There will be squabbles between the borders. There will be no integration of our great race and our great language and our great people. And he had reached the point where he was going to make his concluding remark, and he fished around inside his coat, and he couldn't find his glasses because he had grown hard of seeing, like me now. And so he fished out his little note, his little speech he was going to read to them, and then he couldn't find his glasses. That's what happened. And then he said to his men, he said, gentlemen, I am afraid that in the course of this long, hard war, I've grown old and I cannot see. And at that point, his generals rushed up, and the day was saved. It's kind of like a Newburgh Address. I'm trying to talk to you and I can't see. So I have to put this on. Unfortunately, I was able to find them, but let me just read this to you. This is called a timeline here, timeline for April 5th meeting. That's today, the official date for the publication of Sic Itur Ad Astra, which you can see with your very eyes here. A stupendous achievement, unprecedented in the history of man. Now, I'm going to run this down here. From the 5th of September to the 19th of October of the year 1997, I sold Hayes and Joyner, who were the co-trustees of Galambos' estate, by way of a defective amendment that had been superimposed upon the original trust document of the Galamboses by Mrs. Galambos at a time when she was dying of cancer. And this co-trusteeship has been my nemesis and the enemy of all of you, myself, and of mankind ever since. Between the 5th of September of 1997 to the 19th of October of 1997, I had to sell them on hiring me as the editor for the production of this work here. When in fact, Galambos' trust document named me as his literary executor after Mr. Gafford here, who was the director of the Free Enterprise Institute and the successor to Mrs. Galambos, and who was the first named literary executor on the grounds that he had studied physics and knew mathematics, which I did not. And this was a decision that was made by Mrs. Galambos in Mr. Gafford's favor. Mr. Gafford proved unable to do this, and in a very manly and courageous way, for which I am eternally grateful to him, resigned. Turned it over to me. He did not know that he had been named as a literary executor because these co-trustees didn't want anybody to know that such an office, such a function existed and was the wish, the express instructions of the Schedule B of their original Natural Estate Trust document. But I knew. And that's a long story behind that, which I won't get into. So between the 5th of September and the 19th of October, I dissembled with them, and I went along with them, and I made them think that I was the most charismatic, brilliant guy that ever walked down the pike. And of course, I had a strong reputation with Galambos, and he was very respectful of me, and they knew that they could not gainsay that fact. So I promised them that I would have the whole book done by Christmas of 1997. It only took 5 years to do. But they were so greedy for money and for pelf and for power that they couldn't resist that temptation. They thought I was capable of far more than I can do, or any mortal can do. So on October 19th, I signed a phony contract with them. And in that contract, I would not sign as the editor. I said, I'm not an editor. I don't want to be an editor. If you're not going to allow me to be a literary executor because you say that you don't understand what that term means and that it's too implicitly expressed in Galambos' trust to be understood, and this despite the fact that Galambos defined a literary executor as his literary agent who was to manage his manuscripts, and he defined in the trust what he meant by management when he said that management, and I quote, shall consist of the editing and or publication of my literary properties. When I told the co-trustees, you mean to tell me you don't know what editing means? You don't know what publishing means? They said, we will decide whether or not you're going to be the literary executor, and we won't make that decision until the entire book is done. And I said, it's not your choice to make. Galambos already made it in his trust document. You're in rebellion. And I pushed him right to the edge, and when I couldn't get past that, I came back. I said, okay, so forget about the literary executor. I'm a big enough man in history. History will find out who did this thing and who was what. And so I signed the contract. Now, I claim that was not a contract because it was signed under duress. Galambos taught that if someone accosts you and takes you into a dark alley and points a pistol at your head and says, fork over your dough, buster, it's your life or the money. And you say to that thug, well, here, hey, whew. You open your pockets, reach out, you give him your wallet, you say, I'm willing to strip down. You can take everything you got. So he takes it, and then he says to you, is that everything? And you look him square in the eye, and you say, without batting an eyelash, that's everything, Mac. You got it. And you don't tell him that in your shoe you've got a $100 bill. Galambos said, do you owe that thug the truth? Now, your instincts should all be saying, not at all. He's a thug. He's forcing you to tell the truth. He is not entitled to it. And out of this comes this tremendous principle that's taught in this theory, which I have found most people just don't get. They can't understand it. And the principle is this: defense is always moral, so long as it's defense of property you morally acquired or derived or developed. So, pursuant to that principle, I said, sure, I'll go along with you. Yeah, you guys got authority. Yeah, I'll sign the agreement. And I got them to go and to pay me, not much, but enough to get by. And between October 19th, when I signed that agreement, and by the way, I call that the Zama Day Agreement. That's the day when Scipio Africanus in 202 BC, on October 19th, defeated Hannibal. That was one of the great decisive battles of all time that gave the Western Mediterranean to the Romans and once and for all put an end to the threat of Carthage. That's another story. It's in session 13 of E50 here, told by Galambos inimitably. Between that date that I signed that contract, I went into what I call my fuming time. I was so blasted sore with what had happened, I couldn't even get started on the work that I was supposed to do. They said that if I didn't have V50 completed by a certain date, the penalty would be $1,000 a day. So from the 19th of October to the 1st of January 1998, I just fumed. Finally, on the 1st of January, with a deadline with penalties afterwards for getting this right here, these 3 volumes, that's V50, The Theory of Capitalism. I said, I got to finish that whole thing up. Until then, nobody had been able to do anything right, including Mrs. Galambos, who produced this abomination. Right here. Warren, put that on the camera, please. This is her work. You see all these little flagged yellow things? When I looked at this, I was so disgusted with what she had done. I said, this is not publishable. I don't know what to do with this. My God. And I thought this was going to be the beginning of my, the beginning of the building of freedom. This was it. This was V50, the first 3 volumes of what turns out to be 12 volumes for Sic Itur Ad Astra. And I remember I was sitting in my den and I dropped this to the floor. And my wife came in and she said, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I said, this thing's an abomination. And so then I get to Eric Falvey, sitting over here, my able assistant. He said, let me take a look at it. And he went through it, and his first run through was too much, couldn't do it. So finally he tried again, and he went through, I think, the whole thing, I believe, and logged over 1,000 errors, all of which, I don't know if you can see these, they're in red here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, on every page. On every page, look at this, all errors. Typographical errors, ideological errors, mistranslations, and so on. But he got through it. And then when he was through, I told him, I says, well, okay, let's take by category, misquotes, typographical errors, misspellings, etc. 5 categories, get 5 examples within those 5 categories, and we'll take this to this Hayes creature, and we will make him look at every one of these changes. Now, he's going to try to get out of it because he's not really interested in this book. He's only interested in the money and the estate. But we'll force him to do it. I'm going to tell him, Hayes, you listen to this. And it took a half an hour for Eric to go through every one of these changes, at the end of which he realized this can't be. And to humor me, that was all involved in this period when I sold them. I was so damn sore with these guys. On January the 1st, between January the 1st, if you can believe this, from January the 1st, 1998 to March the 23rd, I went through all of V50 from scratch and produced the text that was the original prototype, although incomplete and defective, because I was learning the business. I was learning the criterion of editing. I got it done. From the 23rd of 1998 to the 1st of May of that year, I had outright war with Hayes and Joyner over the literary executorship. On May 1st, I had a meeting that most of you went to, I believe, and that was when I let the 185 pre-subscribers to Galambos' book, who had been waiting ever since 1971 or thereabouts for the book to be published and be written. And I told them that FEI stunk to high heaven and we had to clean the Algian stables. It would be a Herculean effort. And I crossed my Rubicon then, and I knew that this was going to be for everything. Now, it would cost a lot of money to do this. And at the end of that meeting, I told him, I says, I need plenty of money to do this work. And so a man by the name of Howard White here came forward. He's the gentleman in the maroon shirt, I guess it is. There he is. He raised his hand. He came forward and he says, Bill, what can I do to help? I'd like to finance V50. And he and another gentleman, who since then has reverted back to his flatland origins, offered to pay for this, and I had them partnership up. They got me cleaned up with with the FEI business, We got V50 taken care of. The monies that they hadn't paid me that were in arrears were funded. And so then I went into what I call my wilderness period, when innovating how to edit and format Sic Itur Ad Astra. What the heck does it mean to edit this stuff? You can't believe how much there is here. All of the transcripts of the spoken words of Galambos through all the years that he gave his courses, it's just unbelievable. What do I do here? Well, I didn't know, and I had to figure it out. But one of the things that came to me way back on the 4th of October was I sat there and I says, why, instead of editing this thing and conforming to a pre-established criterion and to rearrange and make everything eloquent, why don't I just leave it the way it is? You know, this was pure oratory here. Warts and all. Publish it. See what happens. But it was so bold that I couldn't quite bring myself to do all that. I found passages that I thought were gobbledygook. They didn't make sense. We're all that way when we speak. You know, it sounds like it might be okay, but it really isn't. If you really check every sentence, it's going back and forward, there's contradictions and stuff. So I was struggling to figure out how to do it. And that wilderness period, I call it, took place from the 2nd of May to the 1st of September of 1998. On the 1st of September of 1998, I said, okay, I'm going to tackle V201. That's all these volumes here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's the theory of primary property. That's the nuts and bolts of the theory. That's the extrapolations and the technology that's necessary to build freedom. The first 3 sessions are the epistemology, the philosophy, and the grand sort of the outline view. But you can't do anything with this. You got to have these 8 volumes here. And finally over here, this last volume, which is right here, V50X. That's 3 sessions. That's the grand panoramic view of the whole business. It's kind of like Newton's system of the world. And that's the whole thing, Sic Itur Ad Astra. So I was trying to figure out how to do that. It was a very daunting task. It was a lot to do. And so I said to myself, what do I do here? And I went on a cruise. I had been my wife and I were among the very few people that ever went to all of the Chart House restaurants in the United States and Puerto Rico. And as our reward, all 65 of them, which was a lark, Julie, but it was a lot of fun. At the end of that, they rewarded us with a trip around the world, or we could take a cruise, leaving from Vancouver and going to the Hawaiian Islands on a nice tour, first class. So I said, I'll take the tour for Hawaiian Islands and the cruise ship from Vancouver down. I love to be on cruise ships, big ones especially, fancy big ones. So when I was on that trip on the 18th of September, it hit me. I had done session 1, I had finished session 2, and I was just getting ready to start session 3. And I was standing on the port side, aft, on the rail. We were at 28 degrees north latitude. We were out there, the weather had cleared. We were just tucked above where the trade winds begin. It was paradise. And the ocean was going by, and I wrote on the margins, I have figured it out. Galambos never wrote his book because he must have realized subconsciously that his spoken articulation of his theory was perfect. It was Keplerian, if you know what I mean. Those of you who have studied the theory must know what I mean when I say that Kepler spent 10 years of his life struggling to get the orbit of Mars, and he couldn't get it. And finally, he said, what if the cosmology of our time is not right? What if, in other words, planets don't describe perfect circles in their orbits around the sun? I mean, they're heavenly bodies. How could they have an imperfect egg-shaped orbit? What if? And that's the question that I resolved for myself. I said, what if Galambos' optimum presentation of his theory is riddled with what we would conventionally call imperfections. What if? And I said, yeah, what if? Let's leave them all in. And I can punctuate it, I hope, and format it, I hope, so that the imperfections mixed in with everything else will delight the reader and go straight to his heart and convince him that this is a beautiful man talking, this is reality, and it's very emotionally ingratiating. So I wrote that in my margins. And from that point on, I was off to the races. And let me tell you that the first stage editing that I did, and listen carefully, it began on 9/1/98, day and night. I often worked till after midnight in my office after a long day. I was a desperate man because I knew that the species was in great peril. From the 1st of September of 1998 to the 3rd of February of the year 2000, I worked steadily. And on the 3rd of September of the year 2000, I finished V201, all of it. The second stage editing took place during that period from 9/26/98 to the 5th of February, just 2 days after I'd finished the first stage editing of the same V201. Third stage editing was a quickie. I did that between the 22nd of February of 1999 to the 24th of February of 1999. Then came V50X, Volume 12 of Sic Itur Ad Astra. That took me from the 7th of February to the 29th of February to do the first stage editing. The second stage editing took place between the 11th of February of the year 2000 to 3/3, or March the 3rd of that year. And then the first stage edit, then I came to the conclusion. Everything I did on V50, all the work I did on V50. And this was, when I mentioned this to Eric, I saw him turn pale. I said, we're going to do it all over again from scratch. I'm not going to look at any of my subheads. Subheads are the little titles within a chapter that tip off the reader as to what to expect you to read about. And by the way, there are over 6,000 subheads that I produced for Sic Itur Ad Astra. And later on this evening, I welcome you to look through this and you'll see those subheads and how they enhance the read and give you a demarcation line around the puzzle pieces that Galambos put together and built his theory with. I told Eric, I says, I'm starting all over again. When Howard was working with me at this time doing editing work, or proofreading, he said to me, oh no. And I said, we got to do it. And I don't want to look at any of the work I did before at all. Number of reasons, but the biggest one was I produced that under the unsavory conditions of duress when I was working under the influence of Hayes and Joyner. So that, the first stage editing of V50 took from the 6th of March of the year 2000, right on out, day after day, without relief, to the 8th of July. Think about that. From the 6th of March to the 8th of July, I went through all of V50. Then I had to go back over it again. The second stage of editing of V50 went from the 10th of March to the 1st of July, or the 11th of July. And I did a third stage editing only for session 3, and that was I did that on the 25th of March of the year 2000. Then I did the editing of the Joe Pyne interview. That's when Galambos went on radio with a commentator by the name of Joe Pyne, an interviewer, and I went over the full text of that. And then I began the process of indexing. I'll let that just pause. I'll just pause it. I'll let that sink in. Indexing. Indexing. Whew. Let me show you what the final result of the indexing is. It requires a whole new word. I can't call it an index, and I can't call it a biblical concordance, so I coined the term a concordex. Let me show you what that is. Do you see this? Do you see this? Over 150,000 separate entries of every subject Galambos ever talked about in his theories. There is nothing in this Master Concordex that we haven't captured. Henry Ford. We got an entry here, as viewed in the partial secondary mode of capitalism. Volume 4, V201, page 402. Henry Ford. Early manufacturing days of. Volume 5, page 6. All under Henry Ford. Founder of the Ford Motor Company. Volume 4, page 184. Volume 4, page 389. Next entry. Not an example of a company president who's a flunky. Those are his words. Those are Galambos' words. That's one of the truly innovative things about this concordance. I told Eric, I says, you've done all of V201. Scrap it. We've got to start over again. We have to put in here the words Galambos actually used. The computer gives us 250 spaces for every entry. Let's take advantage of it. I don't give a damn if this thing is 10,000 pages long. If we can give every single reference, every perspective, every contextual insight into Galambos' discussion of a particular concept, word, fact, person, whatever, we will produce something that will be practically an educational unto itself. Henry Ford II, a parasite who inherited his father's fortune. AJG, not buying Fords as long as he's running the show. An example of a company president who's a flunky. As the model for James Taggart in Atlas Shrugged. Cheating AJG, not in an ordinary way, but on an issue of safety concerning his 1957 Ford. Using a nonprofit foundation to preserve his wealth. I read these, and I could just go on. There's entries everywhere, all over the place. It's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable what's in here. Just the entries on Galambos. How many pages are there, Eric? About 27?
I believe so, yeah.
27 pages just on Galambos. And there are 30 entries per page. You can go through this Concordex and find out everything you want to know about Galambos that he ever disclosed in his great book, Sic Itur Ad Astra. It's right here. It tells you the page to find. Let's say that you're an aspiring businessman. You want to create a company, but you know that the theory of primary property requires that you pay gratitude, and that there are 3 different kinds of royalties. You think you sort of remember that. There was an innovative royalty, there was an inspiration royalty, and there was transfer royalty. Yeah, transfer royalty. My goodness, how do you tell the difference? And how would you be able to find it in all these volumes here? Where would you go? How would you know how to find it? Concordex. Tells you every entry, every discussion he ever made on this. Ladies and gentlemen, there's never been anything like this ever done in the history of the world. Never before in the history of the world has there been a new revolutionary theory of science that has a concordex like this. And never before in the history of the world has there been a revolutionary new theory that is not written, but is actual recorded oratory. That's a very significant thing which I write up in my pamphlet. My pamphlet is The History of Sic Itur Ad Astra. I might as well show you that now. This took me a year and I think it's 9 months. A year and 9 months for me to write this history. This history has its everything that's transpired. I can't possibly do it justice today in this conversation here, or this talk, but there she be. How many quotes, Eric? 100?
Roughly, yeah, about 100.
I'll give you an example. Let me give you an example. By the way, it's called Orbit. This is an historic document. Orbit is stabilized configuration. It's book form for his theories. I used Thomas Paine's format for Age of Reason. And this says, and I'll quote, Orbit being an examination of Sic Itur Ad Astra's creation and final triumph by William W. Martin, literary executor of Professor Andrew J. Galambos, editor/publisher of Galambos' Sic Itur Ad Astra, defender of Galambos' natural estate. Then a quote below it, here, where my finger is. It's right out of his theory, and it says, "There is no such a thing as a small interference of property that is so small you ignore it." Andrew J. Galambos. And the company I created, Spaceland Publications Company. It should be the Universal Scientific Publications Company, but the co-trustees are squatting on it like vultures and feeding off of it to the exclusion of the only person who has the total authority to run the affairs of that trust, and that's myself. But Galambos allows for this kind of a company to be produced by me or even by yourselves if his companies are no longer being operated pursuant to the principles of his theory. He left room for that, and there are quotes from V201 to that effect. On the very first page, I say here, to the pre-publication subscribers, that's most of you, to Sic Itur Ad Astra, who defended its author against his enemies, and to all who come later who will make his theories the light of their lives and the world, I put the following work into your hands. All of this. It contains my account of how freedom became an attainable reality through the theories of Andrew J. Galambos, and how, in spite of the crimes committed against him, he succeeded in propelling his theories into their permanent book form, which he called Orbit. The most formidable tool man will ever have for his survival and happiness is the knowledge contained in this book. There can be no other. And I hope to see its victorious application and the new concept of the majority established before I die. Your affectionate friend and fellow traveler in the eternal voyage, W.W. Martin, San Diego, California, 317th year of the post-integration, 2003, March 21st. The date of this is the first day of the new calendar year called post-integration. Now, if you have pencil and paper, or later, tomorrow, open house at my office, I'll give you the new calendar, but I'll give it to you now. Hope you can remember it. Here we go. The post-integration, that means post-integration from Newton's achievement in 1687, when he published the Principia Mathematica and integrated the physical sciences and ushered us into the Age of Reason and put an end to the Renaissance. He said, Galambos said, the real new year should come with the vernal equinox. That's the beginning of spring, sidereally, not politically. There's nothing political about this calendar. So you got that? The year begins on March 21st. The year will consist of 12 months, 30 days per month, 6 weeks per month. 6 times 5 is 30. All right, that gives you how many days for the year? How many? 360. How many days are in a year? How many? Yeah, and a fourth. Yeah. All right, so we got 360 days accounted for here, but the year has 365. So how do we handle the other 5 days on this calendar? Here's how. At the end of the first quarter, starting March 21st in the Gregorian calendar, you come to an end. The third month is finished. The next day is called first quarter holiday. That's its name. It's not designated by month or day or week. It's first quarter holiday. Then you go another 90 days. You go to the fourth month of 30 days, the fifth month of 30 days, the sixth month of 30 days, and you finish the second quarter, and then you have the second quarter holiday. Now we've got 2 of the last remaining 5 days accounted for. You go another 90 days, And at the end of that 90 days, you have third quarter holiday. You go to the final quarter, and you have your fourth quarter holiday just before the new year, which is the vernal equinox. Now, you got 4 days accounted for. Now, what's the fifth? Okay, you're going to love this. It's not political. There's no mysticism to it at all. Galambos was an astrophysicist, among many other things. And he said, the fifth day, the fifth holiday, will be Perihelion Day. Perihelion Day is when the Earth is closest to the Sun in its orbit. Beautiful. It finishes its long journey back to the Sun, hits the closest part to the Sun, and is slung back out into space. It's the beginning of another orbit. Perihelion Day. And every 4 years, using the Gregorian calendar for our criterion, we have a leap year. You add another day. That's called a post-integration calendar. Now I would like, if Eric, could you, or somebody, Martin, please, would you go over here, pick that up, and read the bottom paragraph on the Declaration of Independence that Galambos produced in 1987 when he was in a hospital having a coronary thrombosis. I hope you can read that, Martin. Can you?
What do you want me to read it, Bill?
Yeah, just pick it up and bring it over here. By the way, you see this version of the Declaration of Independence, there's a lot of commentary at the bottom. Just hold it for me. This was the one he came out with in the early 1960s. Later, as he evolved in his knowledge, he said, we need a new calendar. And we need some commentary here about the Declaration of Independence because it's not Thomas Jefferson that coined this thing. It was Thomas Paine. He needs to receive the credit that's due to him. So he has all that commentary here. Here's a list of all of the ideological flow stream that led up to Thomas Paine's great achievement. And over here, he dates the calendar. Can you read that, Martin? Okay, listen to Mr. Atkins here.
So, copyright 1987 on the 250th anniversary of Thomas Paine's birth. Copyright is not on the Declaration of Independence, but on the prototypes included with additional commentaries beneath the Declaration of Independence. In the new calendar, the date 1987, July 4, actually will be year 301, month 4, day 15, post-integration, PI.
So Galambos had set the precedent. I figured out when I come out and publish his work, I better use that calendar. And I didn't know quite how to go about doing it until I found in my notes where one day, just in passing in the year 1988, he said, oh, the new calendar. Yes, the new calendar. And he gives it, just like I did, but very quickly. And I captured it in my notes. So now you have some insight into the new calendar. It has no mysticism. There are no July, August, March, Mars, and all these mythical names that are behind the nomenclature of the Gregorian calendar and earlier the Julian calendar. So let me come back now and give you this timeline so you can see what an enormous effort this really was. I finished up the second round of indexing of V50X on the 22nd of March and the 28th of March. Between the 22nd and the 28th of March, I finished up that, and then I was done with V50X. Then I said, my God, there have been so many crimes committed here. It's going to be absolutely necessary that I take the time out and write a complete history of everything that has happened, going all the way back to March 14th, 1971, when Galambos first announced his intention to write the book and called that Liftoff, right down to the present time. And I worked on that and rewrote that. If you want to take a guess how many times I rewrote that pamphlet there, it was well over 50 times. And every time I rewrote it, I found something new. For example, I came across this. Again, like George Washington, fish around for my glasses. I was thinking about this. They came out with this abomination right here, which you all received, which they stole from me, which was the original manuscript that I did, which I discarded and started over with. I said, even if they come out with a version of Sic Itur Ad Astra, even if it's perfect, which it wouldn't be, I guarantee you that. Even if they did, though, it would still be wrong. That I knew intuitively because it was stolen. But as I was writing this pamphlet, I said, I got to go back to the very preface here. And I said, I got to add in a quote I just found in Galambos and put it in here. And there it is where my finger is. It's highlighted in black here, where my finger is. Here's what he said. Let's say in that case the world has attained freedom through a book which is based on my ideas but has been written by someone else without my permission. I have lost control over my property. What's your security? The definition of freedom has just been contradicted. You don't have freedom. Beautiful. Thank you, Professor. I'm saying, thank you for defending me. And then I said, my God, he's going to defend me like a partner all the way through this pamphlet. For every assertion that I make, every refutation that I make of their work, Galambos will back me up. And it was true. Here's what he said about his customers. First, what I said. I give you an example of what he called the worst misapplication of his theory. That's the subject. And I write, as I say, Galambos warned his market about misapplications of his theory and told them how he had suffered from them. None was worse, he said, and none was more discouraging to him than when his own market patronized those who stole or plagiarized his primary property. Near the conclusion of his theory of primary property, he declared, quote, the worst thing you can do to misapply the theory is to patronize plagiarists and assorted intellectual thieves. There is no way you can discourage an innovator better than to patronize his plunderers. I have had plenty. Patronize them, and you will act to discourage the disclosures and to create a greater desire to say, to hell with it. The mint is not the only place one can go to. End quote. B201, Section 47, Part B, Volume 8, page 113. To the charge of patronization, he added that of dealing in stolen merchandise, fencing, and helping to peddle plagiarized property. And before I read the quote, so that you may have a nice jolt of self-esteem enhancement, which you have earned, I'm going to read this to you. I want you to know that you're not guilty of this. That's why you're here. That's why there are so few people here tonight, because I put a harsh test to Galambos' market. I said, in view of all the things that have happened, it is imperative that you call for market justice. That requires that you write to Mr. Joyner, you tell him that he's guilty of malfeasance and nonfeasance, and that he is unworthy to be a fiduciary of Galambos' literary estate, and you must resign. I want a copy of that letter. And I also want you to write a separate letter to me telling me what your intentions are with respect to the stolen goods you've received. I need to know it. I am Galambos' representative. This is market justice. We're not going to sue them. We're simply going to bring tremendous pressure upon the trustee. And if all of you will do that, and if you are insistent and tenacious and you will not give up, believe me, he will resign. Reaction? Collective ego collapse. Who in the hell does this Martin guy think he is telling us what we have to do? And I said, all right, they go over to the other side. They don't get the book. They don't get it. The other guys aren't going to produce it. You acted pursuant to what Galambos said you should do. Bring tremendous pressure upon the malefactors and let them know with your big mouth, he called it the big mouth technique, how you feel about it. If there are enough of you and you are unremitting in your voicing with your big mouth, your dissatisfaction, and you let others know about it, this will have a tremendous impact. But I couldn't get Galambos' market to step up and do it. So I said, Galambos, what would you have me do here? Compromise? Appease them? Shove this under the rug? Or be bold and go after them and let them know how I feel? So I wrote that up, and then I came across this quote, and so I said I better put this in here, which made it get bigger and took longer. But here's what he says. To the charge of patronization, he added, he says, I quote, many of my customers patronize these twerps, these endless annual crop of twerps. Don't you love his color? And you know what you do? You do the same thing as Linus did for Newton. You are essentially discouraging the true innovator while you're patronizing thieves, plagiarist twerps who have nothing to offer, have nowhere to go, but which seek a little bit of short-term glory from unearned wealth, unearned accomplishment with no aspirations for achievement. But those who patronize them, you're essentially dealing in stolen merchandise. So anybody who did not write to me and tell me that they had received that stolen merchandise, and they're letting me know in behalf of Galambos what they intend to do with it, either give it to me or keep it under their bailiffship until the time is safe to return it to Galambos' estate. If they don't do that, they have received stolen merchandise and have not denounced the fact. That makes them an accessory in my book and in Galambos' book. He says, that's what a fence does. You know what a fence is? Somebody harbors stolen goods. You know, in the vernacular, you're handling stolen merchandise and you're helping to peddle it. What does that do for ethical business? It discourages it, doesn't it? These are major misapplications which happen annually by the dozen. B50X, Session 3, Part B, pages 189 and 188 and 89. The rising numbers of these malefactors had a profoundly negative impact on the professor. Years later, in a special lecture to persons under the age of 35, he declared, quote, I am more despondent than anyone you know. I've had 22 years of the grandest hell you can know. That was uttered on 1982, October the 3rd. 2 years later, in his third-year course on subvolition, or psychology, he added this statement that condemned all but a remnant of his market. A statement which made nearly a generation before his market will be put through its top tests and biggest filters. Quote, most of the people in my market are vicious and trivial. Fee 275, Session 59, Part B, Section 11, 1984, September 9th. It should come as no surprise, then, that as the world continued to decay morally, the expectable rising numbers of misapplications of Galambos' theories would include the worst of all possible misapplications. Nor should there be the slightest doubt that this worst of all possible misapplications would hit its criminal high point on the heels of the worst of all possible crimes. That worst of all possible crimes, a crime that preceded even the possibility of misapplication, was Hayes's and Joyner's confiscation of Galambos' estate, together with their refusal to acknowledge the authority of the literary executorship and subsequent publication of a spurious volume, this. Let's see, where is it? I lost my place here. Yeah. I can't find a C. Yeah, I'm looking for it here. Oh, here it is. Their publication of a spurious volume of Sic Itur Ad Astra. That is why there had to be an inquisition, a winnowing of the chaff. And that, again, is why I write this pamphlet. I now close the background history of how and why Galambos prevailed over his enemies. His theory of volition is now in orbit. Freedom is more than just a revolutionary definition. For the first time in human history, the tools to build it exist. 2 more tasks remain in the writing of this pamphlet. The first is to expose and refute the lies, calumnies, misrepresentations, and vicious attacks that were perpetrated against Galambos and his teachings in the counterfeit volume published by Hayes and Joyner. The second is to provide a more intimate disclosure of how the authorized version of Sic Itur Ad Astra came to be in its final form. To carry out the first of these tasks, I now pass to the second part of this pamphlet. I will begin at the beginning and proceed in chronological order to name and condemn the crimes that Hayes and Joyner and their fellow travelers committed, with this apostrophe from Galambos' theory of capitalism. And again, I quote, "There is no such a thing as a small interference with property that is so small you ignore it." And then I begin part 2. After the history, the background history, then I refute all their crimes that they committed in publishing this book here and documented every single one of them. And there's another point I wanted to make here up at the beginning that I quoted. Let's see if I can find it here. Yeah, he said, "It's becoming more difficult to pull you upstream. I want more propulsion, not more inertia." He says, "If you people do nothing, everything will go to hell. The natural tendency of the universe is to make energy more and more and more unavailable for work. Apathy kills." He said that in the 15th anniversary alumni meeting. He said here, "It would be hard to imagine any misapplication either of V50 or V201 that did not directly or indirectly stem from either the non-understanding or the misunderstanding, either accidentally or in some cases quite deliberately, of the existence and content of the second postulate." And so on. Now I'm going to tell you this right now. He said, late in his career, he said, I have had 22,000 people go through my courses. 22,000. The number that I now can claim are still with me is down to 100. He said that in 1988. It's now 2003. The number is about 20. And there's other people besides you that are included in this, about 20. Now you may say, "Oh my gosh, what a horribly dismal thing this is." Only 20? That's a miserable showing for 22,000 people took his courses. Look at this, look around. Look, there's nobody here, hardly anybody. That would demoralize most people, but it wouldn't demoralize Galambos, and I'm going to prove it now. He said, "But of course,